My name is О Матвійчук. I am a human rights lawyer, head of the Center for Civil Liberties. When we speak about illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, we speak at least about several categories. The first categories are children who were deported together with their parents. And their destiny depends whether or not their parents found resources and energy to leave Russia as quickly as possible. The second category is children from the state institutions like orphanage. And we have no tool to track their destiny. The third category is children who were sent by their parents to summer camps in Russia during the battles on their territories. And when these territories were released, Russians refused to return their children back. And fourth category, they are children whose parents were killed by Russians or arrested and kept in infiltration camps by Russians. And even these children are preparing for a forcible adoption in Russian families, regarding that fact that they have families and relatives in Ukraine. We are in the cause of the war, and that is why we don't know numbers. Ukrainian officials identified almost 20,000 Ukrainian children being illegally deported to Russia. And only 388 of these children were able to return back. But Russian side said about more than 700,000 of Ukrainian children crossing the Russian borders. And we have no instruments either to prove or deny these figures. International Criminal Court last year issued arrest warrants against Russian President Vladimir Putin and his child commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for the forcible deportation of Ukrainian children. International Criminal Court qualified these actions as war crimes. But this is much bigger than war crimes. It's a part of genocidal policy of Russian state. Putin and Russian top officials openly say that there is no Ukrainian nation, there is no Ukrainian language, there is no Ukrainian culture. And that is why Russian state take Ukrainian children to Russia to raise them up as Russians. And that is why when they cross Russian borders, these children are put in re-education camps where they tell that they are not Ukrainian children but Russian children, and then are preparing for forcible adoption in Russian family to bring them up as Russians. Let me share the story of 10-year-old Ilya from Mariupol. When the Russians circled the city, they didn't grant permission for the International Committee of Red Cross to evacuate civilians. As a result, Ilya and his mother, like thousands of others in Mariupol, sought refuge in the basement of their residential buildings. They melted snow for water and made fires to cook what little food they had. However, when their supplies ran out, they were needed to leave the basement. Suddenly, they found themselves in the center of Russian attacks. Ilya's mother was struck in the head, and the boy was seriously injured. Despite the dangers, his mother bravely carried him to a friend's apartment. At that moment, there was no medical care assistance available, because the Russians had intentionally destroyed the maternity hospital in Mariupol, along with entire medical infrastructure. So they simply lay on a couch, hugging to each other. Ilya later told my colleague that his mother died and froze in his arms. However, that's not the end of the story. When Russians occupied the city, they forcibly transferred Ilya to Russia. His family made enormous effort to bring him back home. This topic is highly sensitive for Ukrainian society because the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children vividly illustrate that we are not just fighting for the freedom to be an independent state but not Russian colony. that we are not just fighting for a freedom to make our own democratic choice, but also about the freedom to preserve our Ukrainian identity and not to be compelled to re-educate our children as Russians. So I hope for a fruitful discussion today. We truly need your assistance to find comprehensive answers to the complex questions of how to return the thousands and thousands of illegally deported Ukrainian children to their homes.